Hey everyone, welcome to this this is a bonus episode of Creating Space. Thank you for tuning in and listening. We're really focusing on formation this month and how we can create space to be formed into the likeness of Christ, not just individually, but within our church communities and in our families. And so thank you for tuning in. If you're listening, please subscribe, please share this podcast with others. And if there's something you'd like to hear us discuss on the podcast, we are hoping to create space for compelling conversations. So send me an email, scottlackey@newstorybuffalo.com, with any questions you may have, and we'd love to jump into those questions and maybe even bring on some experts or leading thinkers who could dive into those questions with us. But for this bonus episode, as we're focusing on formation this month, we have a very special guest, Sarah Cowan Johnson. Sarah is a minister, trainer, consultant, and coach based in Providence, Rhode Island, with over 20 years of ministry experience in church and parachurch. She is passionate about equipping ministry leaders to flourish in their unique callings and contexts. And before starting her own business, she served as a campus staff member and area director with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, where she developed local, regional, and national training experiences for both staff and students. After more than a decade on staff with InterVarsity, Sarah was assessed and approved by the Covenant Church as a church planter. So we have a little bit of in common there as church planters, and served as the executive pastor for Sanctuary Church, a family of neighborhood congregations in Providence. Her primary responsibility at Sanctuary included developing the people and systems necessary to sustain healthy planting and growth. And then in 2022, listen, this is an impressive resume right here. In 2022, Sarah wrote Teach Your Children Well, a step-by-step guide for family discipleship, which won Christianity Today's book award in the marriage and family category. I recently read this book, Teach Your Children Well. I've been telling all my friends about it. I actually spoke at our moms group at our church, and I used a lot of content from the book because I was like, what am I going to talk to a group of moms? But I'm so excited to talk to you, Sarah. Thank you for coming on Creating Space.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
And it feels good to have, I'm in Buffalo, so we're not super close, but you're closer to me than most of my guests.
Yeah. You probably have some snow on the ground still. So do we. Yes.
We do. At the time of this recording, it's like 35 degrees outside, and it's a heat wave for us. We got hit with like 0 degrees for multiple, almost weeks, it felt like.
Yes, same. It's funny how your body acclimates.
It figures it out, and yeah, we're in a new season now. 35 degrees feels great. So, but hey, thank you for taking the time to jump on here today. I know the Lord is using you to do a lot of different stuff. You were recently at the Practicing the Way conference. I imagine you have other conferences and engagements and day-to-day things you're involved in. So thank you for taking the time to be here.
Oh, my pleasure.
Let's jump into your book. Let's talk about this a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised if we end up on a rabbit trail with church planting a little bit too at some point.
Right.
I always love when I can connect with and talk to another church planter. But let's start with the book. I imagine writing a book on family, specifically on raising children, can be a little bit intimidating, because parenting is one of those things where you go, should I let people know what I'm doing right now? How are they going to receive this and perceive this? What led you to write this book, and how did you overcome those fears and hesitations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as you probably could guess from the resume you just read or the bio you just read, I don't have a background in family ministry or children's ministry. My background was in college ministry and then adult education training, discipleship. And so 10 years ago, if you told me this is what I would be doing, I would have been very surprised. So how this all happened was I was serving as the executive pastor at our church. We were trying to hire a kids person. I was sort of in charge of that hiring process. And we couldn't find someone to fill the position. And so I was like, what do we do? And I made a deal with our lead pastor that I would lean in for 1 year to that ministry and sort of cover it. And I really was clear, like, I don't know a thing about children's ministry. I'm happy to learn, but I'm going to come at this from the lens of leadership development. And I'm going to develop a lay team, and then I'll try to hire somebody again in a year. So that was in 2016. And that year, as I'm developing this team, I was like, well, I guess we should read something. So we read Sticky Faith by Kara Powell from the Fuller Youth Institute. And that was the first time I came across how poorly the church is doing in terms of launching lifelong followers of Jesus into the world. So at the time, it was 50% of kids who were active in our churches were leaving the faith. Barna just put that number at 2/3 recently. Yeah. So that moment for me was it was just a shock to the system and a gut punch. I was a mom, I am a mom. My kids were little at the time, and I just thought, I want better than that for my kids. I want better than that for our church. And so I kept researching and reading, like, what can we do to make a difference? And it turns out that parents are the most influential factor when it comes to whether or not a child will follow Jesus as adults. So when I learned about that, just how influential parents are, then I started to say, okay, well, so here's a statistic on that. 82% of kids whose parents talk about and practice their faith at home go on to follow Jesus as adults. So
Mm.
to me, at the time in 2016, trying to build this kids team, I thought, well, we can't just focus on our programming. We really should be focusing on equipping parents. And so I started doing that. Then 2020 happened, and every church around is like, oh my goodness, our parents need help. Because I think they had, really relied on Sunday school to do the bulk of discipleship. So I started doing that training for a lot of churches, and then that turned into the book. So that's a long way of answering, but I never set out to write a book. And I never, that wasn't, it really was it was a happy accident in a way. But it really is out of a passion to equip parents to do the work of discipleship in the home.
I'm caught on a couple of things here
Yeah.
when it comes to I'll just go to the first one. So you start thinking through how you're going to equip parents. What did that look like? What were you doing? If I'm a church leader leaning in
Yeah.
right now or a parent listening right now, what are some of these what are some of the action steps?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the key behavior that makes a difference is so simple in terms of what a parent can do. It's parents who talk about and practice their faith at home. So that when I talk about equipping parents, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about equipping parents to talk about and practice their faith at home. So what does that look like? The very first thing we did in 2016 that fall was a one-off event for parents where I took sort of adult discipleship frameworks and adapted them for kids. So I used Mike Brain's Kairos circle, adapted that for kids. I took a planning framework for spiritual formation plan and adapted that for kids. I'm basically like, well, every parent is a leader. God's given them a little corner of his kingdom to steward, and they need some leadership tools. They need some skills
Mhm.
for discipleship. So that was the very first thing, was sort of, here's some basic ways to think about discipling your kids. But from there, it's kind of morphed and ballooned into a lot of things, including, so what does it look like to practice your faith at home? Spiritual practices that we adapt for families. So what does it look like to practice Sabbath with a 3-year-old, or to pray with teenagers? How do we take classic spiritual practices and help every parent to be able to do them simply and easily and with confidence?
Yeah, there's a couple in my church, and the way they do Sabbath with their family, they have 4 kids, and they've invited us over for the beginning of their Sabbath practice a couple of times, and their youngest at the time, when the first time we went, was like 2, and I think their oldest was around 8 or 9 or so, and just to see all 4 kids engaging, and they read a passage from Exodus together, and it's really cool to see that happening. And I think a lot of people think, "My kids are little, they can't engage," but even
Right.
in witnessing that, their younger children were actually watching and learning from the older ones, and the older ones were engaging in their own way and wanting to read the scriptures or break the bread or different things they do at the beginning of their Sabbath practice. I think there's just a lot of this even happened when I spoke with a group at our church recently about some of the things we're trying with my 2-year-old, and a little bit with my 8-month-old as well. I think a lot of people think my kid's just too young to start doing
Right.
some of these
Right.
things.
Right.
Have you ran into that?
Oh, all the time. Yeah, I think so. I have a lot of thoughts about that. I think one of the primary thoughts that is in our minds that's sort of in the air in the Western church is this idea that real faith begins when children can cognitively understand the gospel and respond to it. And so that everything before that moment is sort of pre-faith. We're like waiting for them to get it. If we're part of a tradition that baptizes believers, we're sort of waiting for baptism. And we sort of, even though we might not say this out loud or actually, if we examine it, we might not really believe it, but we almost think like, well, this is all pre-faith. And then that's like, then they get it, this moment that
Mhm.
they get it. And I think that comes from an overemphasis on ideas and cognition and thoughts about God, which are essential in our formation, but that's not enough to transform us. It's not enough for to be the substance of our relationship with God. We can know a lot of great things about God and not really know him. And so when I think about, little children engaging God, it's not, human beings, it's not that we reach some level of enlightenment and then we're able to interact with God. It's that God stooped to
Mhm.
interact with us. And so I believe God stoops all the way down to interact with babies. And so what does faith look like for a 3-year-old? It's not going to look like perfectly understanding the gospel. It's going to look like knowing Jesus in the way that a 3-year-old can. And for an infant, it's going to look like knowing God before they're able to verbally talk about that. But yeah, so I think the way that I think about faith formation, it starts in the womb, because they're being knit together by the Lord who loves and knows them more than we do.
Mm, that's good. Have you ever had a parent or parents kind of push back, or maybe even just have their own hesitancy because they think, Sarah, these are great ideas, but my kids are just too old. It's too far gone now. I don't
Mhm.
know if
Oh,
we can
yeah.
course correct at this point.
Oh, I think that's a fear for sure. I have had a lot of parents say things like, "Oh, I wish I had this book, when my kids were little. Like I wish we'd done more." And I think first of all, it's never too late. Your influence as a parent, I think when I'm a parent of a teenager, soon to be 2 teenagers, I think you feel like your influence is declining when they're teenagers. You feel that distance, which is natural. They're it's part of their development to sort of push and test, but the reality is actually your spiritual influence lasts. You have more influence when they're teenagers than anybody. And so it's never too late to engage. It's never too late to pray. It's never too late to trust the Lord with your kids. It's never too late to hope that they will return. So I think, yeah, I know parents feel that sometimes, and I think there is no universe in which God says there's somebody too far gone for me to reach. So
Mm, hmm. Yeah, it's never too late. I think
yeah,
that's a good reminder for a lot of us in every area of our faith journey, honestly.
yeah,
And also giving yourself the grace to do some of these things imperfectly. If
right.
I think back to my own life, there were moments where in my own, I don't know what I would call it at that point in time in my life. Maybe as a teenager or early 20s, you could call me self-righteous, where I would say things to my parents like, well, you guys didn't do this, you didn't do that. And, you know, kind of, I don't know how I'm going to respond to that when my kids maybe say that to me one day. My kids are still so little, but I imagine some of those things have to be maybe a little troublesome for a parent to wrestle with too, of like doing this imperfectly. And what if my kids notice that I'm doing it
Re-
imperfectly? And how do you
oh,
give grace for
yeah.
yourself with that?
Yes. Well, I think parents have to learn how to model asking for forgiveness. I think that's something that I feel grateful that my parents modeled for me. my parents are both, my mom has passed away. My dad is still a very important part of our family. And, my little nuclear family, my dad is our, he's around a lot. And, you know, I admire them so much. And I might have been tempted to think, oh, they're sort of perfect in some ways, like that. I really admire them, but they always modeled apologizing, asking for forgiveness. I was never under the,
Mhm.
delusion that they were not sinners. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And I think that that is really important because, yeah, our kids need to know we don't think we're perfect.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Uh, Two specific ideas from the book that I would like to dive into. The
Yeah.
first one is throughout the book, you provide various types of spiritual disciplines or practices to try within your family.
Mhm.
And I can't remember what that was, but other than the sandwich that you joked, was it a sandwich that you joked about making? What was that again?
Yeah. So I was describing why kids need to taste the way of Jesus. They need to not just know that, the way of Jesus is the best possible way to live because my parents told me or because whatever, but they actually need to like taste it and try it and follow Jesus so that they know this I would never do anything else. And so the analogy that I used is that in my family, my kids, when they make a grilled cheese, they make a grilled cheese the way everybody else does, but then they go to the fridge and they get out spicy golden golden brown mustard, so Golden's mustard,
Mhm.
and they put it on top and like spread a layer of mustard on top of the grilled cheese. And I've never met anybody in my life who does this except that I do this, my dad does this, and my grandfather did this. So we're like,
Mhm.
it's 4 generations of mustard on top of the grilled cheese. And the way that I was, using this as an analogy was that my kids are so confident that this is the best way to eat a grilled cheese that they will ask for mustard in a restaurant or at a friend's house. And that's how I want them to feel about following Jesus in a world that thinks that's crazy, is that they're so confident it's incredible that even when their friends don't do it, they're going to do it anyway. So
Mhm.
that was the sandwich thing.
I love that. Yeah, that was funny. And out of all the
You got to
practices,
try it. You got to try
yeah,
it.
I do need to try. I do like spicy mustard, and I haven't had grilled cheese in a long time. I must admit that. But maybe I'll have it. I always get nervous about having bread for lunch because then I go into food coma. But maybe one of these days I will. I'll give it a try, and then I will email you and let you know. We love spicy stuff here in Buffalo. Buffalo wings, everything like that. So
Yes.
I'll give it a try
All
one of these
right.
days. Uh, Outside of that practice, which
Mhm.
obviously I know you were somewhat joking there a little bit, but it was also a great analogy. What are maybe one or two of your favorite practices that you suggest in the book that you would say, hey, these are maybe even good onboarding practices? I know some
Yeah.
of them were dependent upon age as well. But what were you saying? What would you say? Like, these are some ones that I'd say really hone in on, give these ones a try, and then allow them to open up a door for other ones as well.
Yeah, yeah. So one that I love that ages up really well, and we've started doing this. We did it with our boys as soon as they were old enough to really answer these questions. So toddlers, and we actually now have custody of our 3-year-old niece. So I have two older boys,
Mm,
and I have a 3-year-old again, which is wild and a whole
congrats.
story. But yeah, it's been crazy. But we're doing it with her. So it's the practice of the examen, which is an ancient practice from Saint Ignatius, um, who. So the adult version is you're looking back over a day, usually sometimes a longer period, maybe a week, but we do it every day. You're looking back and you're looking for moments where you sensed God's presence and then moments when you missed God's presence. And the idea is over time, you're noticing patterns and you're trying to cultivate an awareness that God is always present with you, even when you don't notice him. So for a toddler, they can't answer the question of, where did you notice God? But they can answer these questions. So we start with, When were you happy today? When were you sad today? And who
Mm.
was with you all day long? And the answer to that is Jesus. So we go around, the whole family answers. Let's share, when were we happy today? When were we sad today? Who was with you all day? And the idea is, from that early age, the toddler is learning, I'm not just with God in the highlights, the mountaintops. Like, God is present with me when I got a timeout or when I scraped my knee or whatever. God was there. And to the point that when my oldest, when he was about 3 and we were getting ready to go to the dentist, and he was really scared of going to the dentist, and I learned, after this, like, don't give him too much notice. I think I told him like a week ahead or 2 weeks ahead. It was like too far ahead. But he was so nervous about it. And I kept telling him, like, Noah, I'm gonna be right there in the room with you. Like, you can sit in my lap. They're not gonna hurt you. They're just gonna, like,
Mm.
brush your teeth. But he was so nervous. And then finally, I'm getting a little frustrated one day, and I'm like, but Noah, who's gonna be with you? And he was like, oh, Jesus. And he kind of relaxed about it. And I was like, oh, that's really it's like, okay, it's working. He's aware Jesus is with him at all times. And B, like, that was more comforting to him than me being with him in the dentist chair. So anyway, at age, 2, 3, 4, they can answer those questions. As the kids get older, you can begin to ask, when did you notice God today? And the trick with that is to teach them, well, what does God look like throughout your day?
Mm.
So for example, any fruit of the spirit, like, that's evidence of God. So anytime you felt any of those things, and then maybe you experienced someone acting like Jesus, that's a God sighting. Was
Mhm.
there a beautiful thing that you saw of God's creation? Like, there's a God sighting. So you teach your kids what God looks like. And so that practice of asking those questions, and we do it at dinner or bedtime, um, that can age all the way up, from little kids all the way up to teenagers.
It's great because so often when it comes to spiritual disciplines or practices, we think this is for those really serious Christians for them to go do by themselves in their own
Right.
isolated time.
Right.
But first of all, the practices can be more communal than what we give them credit for. And then also they can be familial as well and at work within
Yes.
our family. And
Yes.
yeah, I've been trying these ideas and I've been trying these things out, even with my little guy. And he does say some silly things
Of course.
sometimes. And I'm like, dude, I don't know where this is coming from right now. He turns 3 in a couple of weeks, but and then there's other times where he said things that are like, there was one night, I'm not trying to brag on my parenting. I was just so proud of him.
No, this is
We
great.
we were reading through, and so every night when we do our Bible story, he likes to, after the Bible story, he loves to go back and look at the story of Jesus going to the cross. He always goes,
Mm.
Jesus going to the cross. Can we go read it? I'm like, okay, Clark, we'll do it. And it started with him pointing at the scrapes. We have the Kevin DeYoung Bible that he really likes with the little pictures and stuff, and he's always like, oh, Jesus has a boo boo. Jesus has this. He's making all these
Yeah.
observations, and whenever Jesus carried the cross, I would always use the language, Jesus is taking on the cross. And then I would say, Jesus is doing that because he loves you. So now he started picking up, I'll say, why did Jesus take on the cross? And he goes, because he loves me. So he's picking that up
Mm.
slowly. And then one night he goes, Clarky, take on his cross. And I'm like, that's really
Oh,
good
wow.
theology right there. And then
Yeah.
the next day he was picking up one of his little brother's toys. It's like a play mat. And he was saying to Kim, my wife, when she was watching, he goes, Clarky's taking on the cross. And like, does he fully know what he means yet? No, but there's something beautiful about,
Totally.
that's, you're starting to make some of these connections. Oh, this is connected to you. And he's talked about, he likes to pray to Jesus, and he's just some really cool moments have already happened. I could go on, but and I just have loved doing this stuff with the prayer and then asking him what he wants to pray for. And like you said, asking him what made you happy today or what did you enjoy today? And just even reminding him Jesus is always with you. Hey, daddy loves you, mommy loves you, but Jesus loves you even more.
Yes.
Uh, Things like that, that once again, I am by no means a perfect parent. He has seen me get angry in ways that I wish he hasn't seen before, or upset, or frustrated, or all of those things. But there's been some really cool moments where God is shining through. And I would have, if I would not have read your book, I would have thought, yeah, let's just enjoy Disney cartoons right now. And we'll occasionally read some Bible stories with him. And maybe he'll think like Noah's Ark is fun or something like that.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
when it comes to really connecting with God, we'll probably have to wait till he's like, 4 or 5 or 6, depending on his
Right,
maturity.
right. Exactly. Well, and the other thing, so when you were just sort of describing what we tend to think about spiritual practices, that it's like individual, super pious, whatever time, that doesn't, fit the reality of children, right? So
Mhm.
like that mindset. So for example, in our home, the idea that you would have quiet time with God, we just banned that word because it was like that doesn't appeal at all to my little rambunctious loud boys. Like they're not going to be drawn to quiet time. So maybe I'll have a quiet time, but anyway, we just changed the word to special God time. And that
Mhm.
way it's like it maybe it's quiet, but maybe it's loud. Maybe it's ruckus. Maybe we're playing with Jesus. Maybe we're singing at the top of our lungs or being silly. And God can handle all that. He loves that. And so I
Mhm.
think the idea that children need to fit into a mold for a particular temperament and also an adult temperament, I think that can be harmful in terms of it discourages us from trying to do spiritual practices with kids.
Right. Well, I did youth ministry for years before we planted the church. I was probably influencing and teaching youth way before I should have been at a way too young of an age. We like to do that with youth pastors. I was so
Yeah.
high. Uh, but there's this thing where in youth group, we kind of teach kids church is all about you. Come to this big
Mm.
event that we have for you. Come to this dance party we have for you. If your church does dancing, some churches don't, but if they do that, come to this thing. It's all about you. And then all of a sudden you get to college, and if there's no college group at your church, well, it's no longer about you. We actually now need something from you.
Oh,
And
yeah.
we need you to serve, we need you to give. And I'm wondering if that's where some of the disconnect comes in, where church
Interesting.
was all about receiving, and now all of a sudden I have to give. And if you start doing some of these things at home, even for example, I took Clark when he was like 1.5 to serve at a homeless shelter on Thanksgiving Day. And we were like, what can we do? And they said, well, we actually color the bags that we put the groceries in. So can you guys just go color the bags? And he really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
But early on, and I don't take him to serve as much as I should, by the way. I'm not saying, but I did see, okay, we can start getting engaged with this stuff at a very young age. And these disciplines teach them that, oh, yes, faith is something I receive, but it's also something I walk in and I serve, and all of these different things. That's what I love about the idea of your book is I think it's gonna, if people take some of these ideas into their family, it'll help kids realize at a younger age that there is a maturity but also a joy to faith.
Mm.
I really, I know I'm kind of rambling here, but I think that this idea of bringing these disciplines into the family helps also bring kids into the church at a younger age, is I guess what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say, if that
Yeah.
makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Well, I think especially if our framework for what following Jesus is includes um at Sanctuary we call it the outward direction, practicing the way. It's the do what Jesus did. It's if our following Jesus is about, just me and Jesus, that's
Mhm.
that's yeah, that's weak discipleship. So I think the more that we can make sure that as we are helping our kids to follow Jesus, they're following him not just for themselves, but for the lost, for the world, for their neighbor. Um, and that is not a shock, right? Later. I think that's really important. Yeah, and I think, so I've thought a lot about that drop off too. So that right now the 2/3, yeah, Barna said 64% and Lifeway said 66% or 67 or 8% of kids who are actively involved in their churches leaving the faith. So why are we seeing that So another just thought is, so John Westerhoff is the model of spiritual development that I like, and I wrote about it in the book. So the middle stage, which is like most of elementary school, and then just kind of a little bit into middle school, is called the affiliative stage, where the primary mindset of their faith is, I believe because we believe. Like my family, if they're part of a Christian home, or my church, like I'm part of this crew and this is what we do. And so like it's, little kids tend to mimic, and those kids are like not just mimicking, they want to be like their
Mm,
their crew. So youth groups in high school that really focus on all the things you were just saying, they really don't help the child to move past that. I believe because we believe. It's like that is the mentality. Like, I go to youth group, this is what we do. And if we don't help them move from that place to an owned, I believe because I'm choosing this,
mm,
when they leave the primary faith community, when they leave the family, they leave the church, they don't know how to follow Jesus by themselves.
mm,
They only know how to follow Jesus with their youth group or with their crew. And the key thing that happens that makes that transition is searching and questioning and doubting and wrestling and figuring it out. And that's really threatening to parents and to churches who feel like, oh, that's a threat to faith, when it's actually, that's like a necessary thing kids have to do to own their faith. And I think when that doesn't happen, then they're doing that later in life. And I think honestly, a lot of the deconstruction stuff, I think, is sort of a delayed searching that happened in adulthood. And, sort of there was no there was no category for those questions when they were teenagers. So I could talk
so
about that one.
how do we fix that? How do we
Yeah.
fix that is the question. I know
Yeah.
and how do we fix that? Due to the how new this research is, you might be somewhat theorizing. So we recognize that and understand that. But what are
Sure.
some of your theories? What do we do?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I do think Christian Smith's research on, as I said before, that parents who talk about and practice their faith at home, vast majority of
Mhm,
kids follow Jesus. So start there. Talk about and practice your faith at home. But specifically for teenagers, when they get to that place where they're questioning and wrestling and asking, all the things, to view those, whether you're a pastor or a parent, to view that as good. Like, this is healthy. It is normal. It's necessary for them. It's not a threat. It's actually, it's healthy. It's natural. So I think kids, I've noticed, have, based on their temperament, based on their personality, they're going to have different types of questions. So my oldest, he's just a super like intellectual, smart kid who likes to read, and he is asking all the questions about, um, like, he'll point out, yeah, why are the genealogies in the gospels different? Like, that bothers me, like, um, he'll point out, you know, yeah, just like little things in scripture that he'll be the one who wants to know about the authorship and is this trustworthy, right? Those are his questions. Other kids have more pastoral questions. What about my friends who don't know Jesus? What about
mm,
sexual minorities, whatever it is that's gonna like hit them. And then like for me, my questions were all social. Like, how is following Jesus gonna cost me socially? Like,
mhm.
it was, a different set of questions. But I think all of those questions are important. So I think parents and pastors, when kids are coming with these questions, instead of answering them too quickly or shutting them down, I think we need to say, that's a fantastic question. You got to find the answer to that. Let me help you. Like, let's talk about this, or let me, you know, let me encourage you as you wrestle, because you need to get to the bottom of this.
I would completely agree. The environment that I was really discipled in, which was like a Christian youth camp, and uh, they always had this mentality of, oh, all questions are welcome here, but really it was certain questions
Yeah.
are welcome
Yeah.
here. And if you don't like the answer that we already have, then sorry, 16-year-old, there's something wrong with you.
Right. Right.
And
Yep.
it really wasn't inviting to questions. And we have to it's a hard thing to do. I get it, especially if you're someone who loves Jesus and you've been studying the scriptures all your life and somebody's interrogating you with questions and it's somebody you love. It can be hard at moments to be like,
Yes.
whoa, you're questioning. I get it. It's really hard, but I agree with you. There needs to be a level of spiritual and intellectual integrity and just a little bit of trusting in God with the outcomes and
Yes.
saying, let's work through this.
Yeah. Well, and I think something I feel really strongly about is that parents, part of what we have to work on is our own internal belief or sense that the gospel is it's good news for everybody. So the questions about sexuality, the questions about, I don't know, current events, whatever, that feel where we start to feel our blood pressure rise a little bit. I think sometimes at the root of some of those questions, of some of that anxiety that we might feel, is this subtle unraveling of, how do I answer? Like, how do I defend that the
Mm,
way of Jesus really is good news in 21st century post-Christian
yeah.
Western culture? Like, how do I have a good answer for that? And deep down, maybe I'm not really sure it's actually good news. And so I think part of what I talk about with parents is you have to do the math yourself. You have to you have to get to the bottom of, um, why is the Christian sexual ethic good news?
Hmm.
Like, why? Why? Uh, yeah, why? Like, and is it, can do you have a, are you convinced of that? Because I do think that some of the anxiety is like, "Oh, don't ask that question because I don't even know how I'd answer it?"
Yeah. And I wonder, maybe sometimes giving yourself the freedom to say, I don't know right now.
Exactly. Yep. Yep.
Um, it- so you touched on engaging 21st century current events, sexual ethics, those kinds of things. Early in the book, one of the things you mentioned was this approach of fight, flight, or camouflage. I loved it.
Mhm.
I've actually used that in sermons that I've given at different places and at different contexts, but I think it applies to so much of the Christian life. Can you break that down just a little bit as we're
Yeah.
coming to a close in this interview? I just loved that thought and even how it affects families and raising up kids, but also just the Christian life in general.
Yes. Yeah. So, um, you know, for the past 25 years or so, we in the United States, we've been in a, what scholars call, a post-Christian culture.
Hmm.
And so just really simply, it's, prior to that, Christianity had exerted significant influence on culture. And in the last 25 years, that influence has declined in the sense that, for example, the moral high ground in culture has largely shifted to the secular. And many people feel like the way that I talk about it is like they were inoculated to the gospel. Like they
Mm,
were exposed to enough of it in Christendom that they learned how to defend themselves against it. Now we're seeing a shift with Gen Z, who is basically not inoculated. They all grew up in a post Christian culture. And I think that's part of why we're seeing Gen Z come back to faith
mhm,
in such large numbers. But anyway, so in a post Christian culture, when the church feels its influence waning, it feels like it doesn't have the same cultural cachet it used to have, churches respond sometimes like the same way that a threatened animal responds to a threat. So, fight, flight, or camouflage. So, fight is, animals that, yeah, like a bear will attack you when it's threatened. Some churches feel that they're, in a post Christian culture, they kind of go culture war. Like, we're going to win, we're going to battle it out, we're gonna take back ground, that kind of thing. And so that's sort of that's one response. Another response is to flee. And so like a deer will run away when it's scared. Some churches sort of evacuate mainstream culture and create, safer Christian enclaves and bubbles. And there's a time for, just like there's a time for healthy engagement, there's a time for healthy disengagement. I think we need
huh,
spaces that are healthy for us. So I'm not saying never disengage, but but we also don't want to abandon the world. So there's fight, there's flight, and then camouflage. This is probably the one that I feel in our city is like, I just don't want to rock the boat. I'd rather blend in. I don't really want people to know I'm a Christian. I kind of hope that I can be just normal at a dinner party, or meeting my friends, my kids' friends at school. Like or their parents. Like I don't want to be weird. Right. Um, so I think none of those responses helps our kids to know how to follow Jesus confidently, like that grilled cheese thing, how to ask for
Mhm.
mustard anywhere. None of those responses prepares our kids to follow Jesus in a world that doesn't. Because that's if we're raising children to love Jesus today, we are setting them up to follow Jesus when many of their peers will not.
Mhm.
And we pray that what's happening in Gen Z will continue with Gen Alpha. Like we pray that there will be renewal. I actually believe that is happening. And that we will see, um, more numbers of young people coming to faith. But right now, yeah, my kids choosing to follow Jesus as it relates to enemy love or sexual ethics or whatever, they're going to be totally different than their friends. And so fight, flight, camouflage. The other way is to think of yourself. John Tyson calls it a creative minority. So the church is a creative minority. It's like Daniel in Babylon. It's a small minority who is engaged in culture for the sake of being a redemptive influence. Like, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to compromise. I'm going to love, I'm going to engage. And my prayer is that as I follow the way of Jesus with this community, it actually will be a redemptive influence in the world. So,
Right. And if I am going to fight, it's going to hopefully be in a cruciform,
yes.
cruciform, enemy embracing,
Yeah.
power under, not power over, coercive, not fight fire with fire, but fight
Yes.
fire with sacrifice and love.
Yes.
And see
Exactly.
see how that works. And it's committing to a long game in a lot of ways, but it is the way of Jesus. And I just really love that insight from you. Like I said, that could apply anywhere. But there's this better
Yeah.
way, this fourth way for churches and families to engage. The way I was framing it was like when I talk to a lot of Christian parents, you have kind of the shelter mentality or the mission mentality is what I call it.
Yes.
And the
Yes.
shelter is like
Yep.
we have to pull away and get away from the world. And the
Yep.
mission mentality is no, my kids are missionaries, so we're going to be involved in everything and they're going to influence the world for Jesus. And uh, I feel like the third option would be preparation. And like we just have to
Mhm.
prepare, do our best to prepare our kids, do our best.
Right.
We're going to all make
Right.
mistakes. We're all going to all
Right.
fall short. And some kids, depending on the season of life, might need more shelter than others. Some kids might be more ready for mission than others, depending on season of life.
Yep.
But I think we get ourselves in trouble when we act like there's a blanket principle for
Yes.
all kids at all time. The best thing to
Yes.
do is shelter. Well, I've seen that not work for some kids. The best thing to do is go mission. I've seen that not work for some kids. But
Yep.
I've seen both work for kids. And some of it is just have some grace to say each kid's different and each season of life is different.
Yes. Yeah, we do an event at our church for parents called How to Choose a School. And we, for like younger than kindergarten, what should I do? Should I homeschool? Should I Christian school? Should I private school? Should I public school? And the sort of like secret of the event is we're not gonna tell you like which option to pick. What we're gonna do is have a panel of four families who are all faithfully following Jesus, choosing each one of these things and interview them and help you think about how to ask those questions. And, in every context, whether it's your home, if you're homeschooling, or public school, if you're public schooling, there will be threats to the way of Jesus, and there will be things that will help your child to follow Jesus.
Mhm.
And so in anything that you choose, you're going to have to figure out what you need to supplement, what you need to correct, um, what you need to foster and encourage and, throw gas on. But there is no perfect blanket, for example, with schooling, and I feel the same way about many parenting choices that we make. The goal is we want to launch lifelong followers of Jesus. That's
Mhm.
the destination we're heading for. The path that we take there, there's many different faithful routes. But what I get more concerned about is when the target we're aiming our kids at is something other than that. And I think that that's
Mm.
honestly a lot of parents, a lot of well-meaning Christian parents, I see aiming their kids at a version of the American dream over being a lifelong disciple of Jesus. And that bothers me more than like, did you choose this school or that school? So,
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I have so many questions that I could keep asking you, and I'm so thankful for your time. You've said so many things, and then there's other questions that have been coming up in my head. I wish I had more time to keep asking more questions, but let's, as we wrap this up, I think what I would like to end this with is, are there any other thoughts that you say I'd like to get out there, or uh, for a parent listening right now who's possibly discouraged or maybe
mhm,
even a little bit confused, or maybe even a little bit, I don't know what to do next.
yeah.
How would you minister to that parent? What would you say to them?
Yeah. Honestly, I'll say the thing I say almost every time I talk to parents, which is to remember that you and the Holy Spirit make an incredible team, that this is
Mhm.
not all on your shoulders. Sometimes when we start to feel conviction around, oh, I really want to do this, we start to feel pressure, we start to feel anxiety, we start to feel like I can't do it, I'm not good enough, I don't know enough. And I think there's 2 ways that I respond to that. One is there's so much grace. You are if you think about being yoked to Jesus, you are the baby ox and he's the one pulling the weight and you're along for the ride. And when you feel that sense of, "Oh, I don't know my Bible the way that I want to," allow that gently to invite you to grow in your own walk with Jesus. But I think, there's no place in this conversation for that, the pressure that leads to sort of, shame if we don't get it right. That's not an invitation from the Holy Spirit. So just remember you're yoked to Jesus. You and the Holy Spirit make an incredible team.
So good. I'll say amen to that. Thank you for your time and thank you for joining
You're
us.
welcome.
If somebody wants to follow you, connect with you in some way, what are the best ways to do that? And are you working on any future projects at the moment?
Oh, yeah. Um, so I on Instagram. So that's a good place to connect. I have so for parents, sarahcowanjohnson.com. There's a free free resources section that has a ton of stuff for parents. For churches, Family Discipleship Labs is my ministry for churches to help them think about equipping parents. So you can find me there. I did just finish a proposal for a second book. So we will find out if someone picks that up. So stay tuned. But that's on the working title is Parenting Upstream. So and subtitle is Raising Disciples in a Post-Christian World. So in all the ways that we feel like we are swimming upstream as followers of Jesus, parenting young Jesus followers. Yeah. How can we do that well?
That's exciting. I will get it on pre-order as soon as it's available on Amazon. And I will link to your book, your website, everything you just mentioned in the show notes as well. Thank you once again for joining us on Creating Space, Sarah. This was a blessing, this conversation. I know it's going to bless all of our listeners. So thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. My pleasure. It's great to be with you.
And thank you to everyone for tuning in to this special bonus episode of Creating Space. If you have any questions or anything you'd like to hear us talk about, you can please email me at scottlackey@newstorybuffalo.com. Please subscribe to the podcast, share it with others. Thank you for tuning into this episode, and we'll be back on the first Thursday of the month with a brand new episode of Creating Space.